So, welcome to the second webinar of the series devoted to help you approach each dissertation chapter successfully. Today, I will dissect the chapter that presents the theoretical and research basis of your dissertation and which, as the title says, becomes the foundation upon you build a high-quality dissertation. As usual, let's begin with a quote. The quote presented emphasizes the importance that the chapter that discusses the theoretical and research elements related to your study has to the whole dissertation. When this chapter is developed in a valid, comprehensive, and critical way, you have the necessary input to interpret and connect your results to the identified gap of information and therefore achieve your research purpose. And this is the agenda to dissect chapter 2 for you. I will begin by discussing the importance and purpose of the chapter. Then we will focus on the literature review that is the core of the chapter and what steps you can follow to perform such an important task in a coherent, effective, and feasible way. Each one of these steps that I'm going to present and that there are in the slide, each one of them is going to be explained and actions to conduct it suggested. So it's not just a matter of explaining, but also to give you some idea of how you can address each one of those actions. The last point is to talk about the common mistakes that supervisors, committees, and editors find when reviewing what usually is chapter 2 of theses and dissertations. When you write what is usually the second chapter of your dissertation, you are building the foundation of it. Think of it as the basis of a building. Your dissertation will be developed upon it and within the limits it establishes. Therefore, as it happens with a building, any part of your dissertation that is not based on it may collapse. So important the analysis of the literature related to your study is. Let's point it out the reason for that more specifically. First of all, let's talk about what the chapter is written for. The 4 goals presented are intended to set up the context into which the problem and the research of it is going to be discussed. That context includes what is already known and what is unknown, as well as how both things are interrelated with your study. That is done in such a way that all the variables or elements involved in your problem are considered so as to let you build a comprehensive picture of what is happening and consequently improve the possibilities of addressing the problem successfully. The more accurate the picture, the better the decisions and results. Of course, the input to create that picture is the review of the literature that is related to the research problem, and the tool to assure its quality is critical analysis. Why? Because it means it's through it that you know what the ideas discussed in a source are and evaluate their validity and usefulness for your work and the field of study. So let's focus on the literature review. Literature review is perhaps the stage or the step of the dissertation process to which you have to devote more time. You begin it when you are trying to decide which topic and research problem you want and can study, because the appropriateness and feasibility of your work depend on how accurate and well conducted your initial search of the literature is. It also has to be done throughout the whole dissertation process and even after the defense, since sometimes committees ask you to complete some parts of the literature review. So first of all, let's talk about the goals you need to achieve through literature review. Unsurprisingly, they are the same purposes mentioned for Chapter 2. I decided to present them in this way to emphasize that the whole chapter is literature review and that it is written to support the whole building called dissertation. A sloppy literature review is, in fact, a winning ticket for failure. As you can see, these 4 general goals are intended to give your research a clear and supported place in a specific field of study. They make clear what is already known, what is unknown, how your study is linked to others, and what variables are related to the target problem. Literature review is the selection and analysis of published and unpublished documents on the research topic and problem to contextualize the study, provide a picture of the state of the art, support a point of view, justify decisions, and establish the significance of the study. To make this idea clearer, check the figure of the slide. It shows some of the questions that can be answered through literature review, and this supports the importance I have just assigned to it, because those areas are behind most of the decisions you have to make in the dissertation process. From the general goals or objectives just mentioned, specific purposes can be derived for the literature review. These 10 specific purposes can be used to understand how the general goals can be achieved. For example, in order to summarize what is known in relation to your study, you have to create a literature review that defines the place your study has within the target field of a study and establishes what has been done and what is being studied in that area. That process helps you know what knowledge is missing and why it's necessary to get it. In doing so, you fulfill the goal of establishing the gaps of information your study can help to fill up. When you evaluate theoretical elements, relate them to applications, identify ways of approaching the problem, and select a research paradigm and design, you are in fact linking your own study to other studies and to their identified gaps, and therefore achieving the 3rd general goal. The final goal is reached when you use all the information gathered, analyzed, and discussed to deepen your understanding of the research problem. In summary, you can establish 4 general objectives for performing a literature review and actually achieve them by means of focusing on 10 specific purposes. Please remember that you can ask any question, just write down at the chat box, and under the handouts tab, I uploaded these slides for you, so you can download from there. Okay, there are many ways of approaching the development of the literature review, and you can choose the process that most appeals to your cognitive style. However, the steps I'm going to present will always be part of it in one way or another. Please be aware that although they are presented here as a sequence, some of them can be done simultaneously. For example, reading and registering information. And here you have the 6 steps I want to propose you to follow in order to develop your literature review. Now, let's explain each one of them and give you some suggestions. Let's begin with the step of reading. Reading for getting the kind of information you need to develop the literature review of your study must be focused, purposeful, and critical in order to understand contents deeply, and that implies you have to use specific reading strategies. You cannot read as if your goal were to get entertainment. Therefore, in fact, you are reading in order to get information to convince people. So therefore, I will suggest you some sub-steps to follow in order to read effectively enough to create a high-quality literature review. So this big step that is reading, that takes a lot of time of your work, I'm going to dissect it for you in other sub-steps. The first sub-step leads you to perform a purposeful reading. When you want to find out about the elements on the left column, you have to focus on the elements on the right column. In other words, you have to read about prior research studies if your main focus is on pivotal elements and findings, okay? Or if you are interested in knowing what principal explanations of viable, common, and divergent points have been used so far, you have to read about theory, models, approaches, etc. In this way, you look for the information you really need. Please be aware that pivotal elements refers to research problem, purpose, research questions or objective, and research design. So you have to perform purposeful reading in order to get what you really need. Now, making a list of questions before reading lets you perform a focus reading. You may ask questions about the ideas or questions to analyze, reflect, and evaluate argument, or even questions of both types. The approach is that you read to find answers to some questions you already have. Those initial questions may trigger others while you are reading because either you don't find the answers or want to expand the scope of your expectation after answering them. And these are illustrative questions about ideas and their relationship to other studies you have read. You expect to identify the main ideas of the source you are going to read and the evidence provided to support those claims. You also expect to get concepts, keywords, and theories used to explain the main ideas. And your questions can even be expanded to include your understanding of the ideas and their relation to other sources. All these questions reflect you are an active reader who tries to go beyond the basic reading decoding level, and that implies you gather information upon you can base critical analysis through the next set of questions. This one. And these are the types of questions that let you perform critical analysis. When you read trying to answer questions about issues discussed, perspective, possible biases, validity of arguments, coherence of conclusions, gaps, and comparison to other sources, you are doing critical analysis and a more productive reading that will impact the quality of your literature review. Sorry. Keep the two kinds of questions I have presented today in your mind and apply the approach in your next reading. You will be shocked about the depth of your understanding if you follow those guidelines. Reading the abstract lets you know if the reading is related to your study and what points of it are interesting to you. That little action saves time and effort. And do not avoid readings whose arguments are against your point of view, since they may enhance your understanding of the problem significantly. Sometimes the most relevant finding of a study comes from discussing an opposite argument. This sub-step suggests you use the scanning reading strategy, which means look for specific information without reading everything. To apply it, first you check the headings and subheadings to have a clear picture of what is included in the study. Then look for authors, title, and publication information. Then check problem statement and research questions. After that, you look for the purpose of the study, and then you look for the research design. In this way, you have very specific information about the study. Of course, this same reading strategy, you can use it to find out other aspects, other specific aspects that you are interested in knowing. For instance, what a specific theory they use, or what a specific instrument they use to gather data. So scanning helps you to find information, specific information, very quickly. Another useful reading strategy is skimming, which is focused on finding the main ideas of a text without spending too much time in each paragraph. And you may ask, how can I do that? To do that, you can first read the first few paragraphs in detail to know where it is heading. Then read only the first sentence of each paragraph, which is usually the topic sentence that expresses the main idea. If you cannot grasp the main idea in the first sentence, or it interests you very much, you can use a mix of a skimming and a scanning and pay more attention to some details that may be useful. And then finally, you record the main ideas and any useful information you have found. Once you have a first input of the information you need, it's time to evaluate which pieces of information require a deeper reading. So for the first evaluation that you did, now you go deeper to be more selective. Based on the question you formulated before beginning the reading and the answers found, you decide how much else you have to read and act accordingly. This sub-step helps you perform a more focused reading and avoid the read forever loop. Because if you don't do that, you will spend a lot of time reading and reading and reading new things, more things, and perhaps that what you are reading is not good enough for you to be used in your dissertation. So avoid the read forever loop. You have to stop at some moment. If you think the information found so far is useful, then you have to complete it by reading again to establish common and divergent points in relation to your study, usefulness for your study, where to include the information in your proposal, thesis, or dissertation, and how to do critical analysis, evaluation of authors' main ideas, procedures, findings, etc. This step, this expand evaluation, will help you deepen your understanding of the source and therefore use or discard it with stronger arguments. The read forever loop is something I recognize, says Patty. Yeah, I don't think that is only you, okay? Many students recognize it. By the way, welcome Patty, David, Regina, Jeum. Okay. And these are the reasons why these steps help you produce a better literature review. The first two steps focus your reading. The third one saves time and effort, which both things are very scarce resources when doing a thesis or a dissertation. The next two let you gather accurate basic information, while the last one create the foundation of the required critical analysis. So you have 7 steps, and all of them can be useful for you. Regina said, good to be here. Great. Hope you find this not only interesting, but also helpful. Okay. The second step, remember that what we have already talked about are sub-steps to do a very focused and purposeful and useful reading. Now you have read, so it's time to do something else. The second step to take into account while developing your literature review is registering and summarizing information. So you have to write down in a software or in a tool what you have found out, because you cannot trust only your memory. It's important to know how to register the gathered information in a way that can be retrieved easily and, more importantly, accurately and usefully. Okay? The better you register information, the less effort and time when writing the literature review. The next slide will present what information is advisable to register in the software you use, okay? Let's see, how can you register information in a way that can be useful for you and that you don't have to do something like, I read it, but where did I read it? Okay, no, that is not going to happen if you look at this. You can begin with the author and publication information and include the pivotal elements of the study you read. It's all what it is on the left part of the slide. However, that may not be enough when you have to perform critical analysis. That is why the kind of information presented on the right of the slide may improve the usefulness of your records. If you include this information, you will have a strong basis to write your literature review without getting back to read the source, and will even know where you can include it. This is what is called an annotated bibliography. And in fact, it is a very, very specific way of an annotated bibliography, because generally speaking, an annotated bibliography include only main ideas and that kind of things. I have I have tried this approach, I have refined it, and I can tell you that if you can include all this information for each source that you consider useful for your dissertation, the path to write your literature review will be very, very easy, because you just have to say, okay, software, tell me what I'm going to include as references and citations in my discussion of the methodology, for instance. And then you have all the information together, ready for you, okay? The next step takes you nearly to the task of writing, because we have to write. So then the third step of the process to create your literature review is the one focused on organizing your ideas, which I presented in a previous webinar that you can find at your university's page, Dr. Annette. However, I'm going to summarize the main ideas discussed in that webinar right now. Organizing your ideas is a crucial stage of the literature review development, since it defines what information and in what order will be included. If you do this before actually writing, you will be able to check the coherence and consistency of the information, establish if you have any gap of information that readers need to understand the discussion of your ideas, and be sure your ideas flow smoothly. The slide provides you a list of action that guide you when trying to organize what you are going to write. Read them and reflect upon how you can perform this action, and very importantly, apply them to your next academic text writing. The more you use them, the better the consistency of your text. Remember to check the webinar about organizing your ideas for writing. Okay, so there you have 6 things that you can do to organize your ideas. The fourth step is focus on acknowledging the contribution of other people to your work. As you know, plagiarism is a severe academic offense. Therefore, you have to avoid it. And this is a step that happens concurrently to others. Okay, so here you read, at the same time you register, and at the same time you check, you acknowledge sources. In the slide, you have some key points to take into account when acknowledging sources in a dissertation. Pay special attention to the last one, since if you know right from the beginning what referencing style your university requires you to use, you can select it in your referencing software, and therefore you are going to prepare your entries to be used according to the referencing style required. However, I want to recommend you not to rely solely on the program to write your citations, since its accuracy depends on how you have introduced the information. If you use inappropriate spelling or capitalization, wrong names or titles, or have incomplete information, the citations will be written wrongly in your dissertation. We can summarize that situation as garbage in, garbage out, okay? Although you can hire an editor to take care of your references and quotation, it is always advisable to know the basics, since that knowledge will help you create better input as well as evaluate the quality of the editor's work. By the way, there is a new version of the APA manual, the 7th edition, with new things like not requiring the phrase retrieve from anymore. So we don't have to use retrieve from anymore. And there is the inclusion of more social media sources to acknowledge. Regina says, is it appropriate to use practice-based observations in your literature review? That depends on your problem, okay? That depends on the variables involved in your problem, because there are some variables that can be understood and can be explained better using practice-based observations, okay? Which is, in fact, just a methodological tool to gather information, okay? So everything in a dissertation has to be knitted together. So your problem defines your purpose. Your purpose defines your research questions. Your research questions define what things you have to read about, what variables you have to pay attention to. And all that information has to be taken into account to select the methodological tools that you need to answer your question and address the research problem, okay? All right. And we get to the step of expressing ideas, which relies on your mastering of academic writing and in which you use the input of the other steps, especially the one of organizing your idea. This is what you, when you are doing this, you feel that you are working in your literature review, but that's not true, because what you are going to do in this step relies on what you have done so far, from reading to organizing ideas, okay? Expressing ideas is focused on writing paragraph for the different sections of the literature review. It's a kind of baby steps process, and the slide summarizes what you should do to create a coherent text. Since the way you choose to write paragraph can set the difference between a well-written paragraph and a confusing one, I suggest you go to your university page at Doctoral.net and review the video about the middle paragraph and the webinar about how to write sentences and paragraph. By the way, the middle paragraph is not a restaurant menu entry, but can be as useful as, or more useful than one, because it is a consistent and effective way of assuring writing the kind of paragraph that reflect the points stated in the slides. So M stands for main idea. E stands for evidence that support the main idea. A stands for analysis of the relationship between the main ideas and the evidence. In other words, why that evidence supports the main idea. And the L stands for linking that paragraph to the next one, or linking that paragraph to the whole section, or linking that paragraph to the whole dissertation. Oh, yeah, Adrian says, here where the meal plan paragraph come in. Yes, she knows about that, because I always suggest that tool, because I have found that is very, very easy to use and also very effective to know, okay, if you are a linguist like Adrian or me, you know how to write a paragraph in other way. But if you come from a field of study in which you don't have a very strong basis of playing with a language, you better follow a specific tool that can be useful for you. Regina says, I find that when attempting to write my literature review, it may become a list of facts. In my first draft, I was told that I was missing from my literature review. Any advice? Yes, Regina. I have already said that the basis of the literature review is critical analysis. Facts are only that. They are evidence of something, but you have to connect those facts to the ideas, to the concepts, to the theories. You have to find out the relationship that those facts have and that those facts illustrate. Okay, so whenever you write your literature or something for your literature review, you have to focus on interpreting the facts. That's why direct quotations are not the best thing to use. It is better either to paraphrase the ideas that you have read, or even better, you interpret them in a different way. That's what, according to what you have written, that's what is lacking in your literature review. Patty says, is your theoretical framework always a separate chapter from your literature review? Also, do you analyze it as much as you would your literature, or just presented it? In the previous webinar, I explained that, okay, the theoretical framework is usually part of the first chapter because it's a general view of what are the things, the theories, and the models upon which you are creating your literature review. Literature review is a deeper, a more comprehensive discussion of the theoretical foundation of your study, and it also includes the discussion of the research foundation of your study, how other people have studied the same problem that you are working on, similar problems that you are working with. Okay, so if you please go to my previous webinar on chapter 1 and you will have a more precise idea. Or I can answer more questions about that as soon as I finish this presentation. I open the question and answer section. Okay. And the last step of the approach I have explained today is focused on writing the first draft of your literature review. It is developed by putting together the product of expressing your ideas and connecting all the parts to make a coherent and consistent whole that function as a unit. And that's the point, Regina. The point is that you have to create something that works together as a unit. And only a list of facts cannot do that, because it will it limits to point out things, but how those things are related, how those things relate to other things, how are you going to use it in your study to explain your problem? That's different. Adrian has just posted a link to get to the middle paragraph with example. As usual, my dear, thank you for your help. Okay, this slide summarizes what you can do to build a good initial product. As you can see, the tasks mentioned are very reflective. And that's the point, Regina. Very reflective. And that means that writing a good literature review is not a cut and paste work, but rather a task based on evaluating, making relationship explicit, and linking your own study to the framework of theories and research relevant to understand and explain your research problem. Review each one of the actions suggested and link them to what has been said in this webinar. They will get you to write a literature review with clear, strong, and unbiased arguments in which evidence supports claims and different points of view are discussed in a sensible and balanced way, in which important gaps of information are presented, conclusions are reached coherently, and the target study is related to others. In summary, a literature review that functions effectively as the foundation of the whole study and your decisions. Now, due to its nature, literature review is a dissertation element in which students tend to make mistakes because it has a complex nature. Complex in the sense that it has too many things that have to be analyzed and put together, okay? So it's time to talk about some of those mistakes, which can be grouped in three areas: mistakes related to writing and style, mistakes that refer to structure and elements, and mistakes that affect credibility and validity. The first area refers to the kind of mistakes that affect the cohesion and coherence of the review and include, but is not limited to, the errors mentioned in the slide. I would like to clarify that not intending plagiarism refers specifically to either including claims whose authors do not support them with evidence or not including page numbers in direct quotations. The last one refers to the rule that URLs are used only in the reference list, at least in reference styles like APA, Harvard, and Chicago. Okay, you don't include URLs in the text. Okay. Some of the mistakes related to structure and elements are the ones mentioned in the slide. They hinder the contextualization of the study, the reliability of the literature review, its completeness and significance, and its degree of critical analysis. So when you make mistakes in relation to the structure, how you write, what sentences do you use, what vocabulary do you use, how you connect one paragraph to the other in a way that the logical organization can be clear and be valid. When you don't connect paragraph, or when you do things like writing a list, you are affecting the unity of the dissertation, and you are in some way hindering the understanding of your position. And the last group of mistakes diminishes the significance and impact of the study. If the study has information that cannot be evaluated or that cannot be considered valid, then its findings and conclusion cannot be trusted, and the whole study becomes meaningless. So, pay special attention to these mistakes since they are less evident than the previous one. I mean, it's easier to find out the previous list of mistakes than these mistakes. and they tend to keep disguise to your eyes, but not to your supervisor or committee eyes. Okay, so be careful that you have to be critical, that you cannot rely only or mostly on direct quotation, because that means that you are not understanding what you are saying, that you don't know how to say that. You have to do it in your own words, with your own reasoning. Okay. If you rely on out-of-date material, unless they are seminal for your field of study, how can we be sure that your findings are valid for today, for this context? When you exclude landmark studies and you don't take them into account, okay, or when you use only non-scholarly sources, or include too many non-scholarly sources, okay? And here you have a list of other actions that may help you do a very useful and well-built chapter 2. So in order to avoid those weaknesses, here you have other things that you can do. Reflect upon them and feel free to ask any questions about them. For instance, don't try to read everything. You are not going to be successful in doing that. So establish the limits for what you have to read, according to what we said in the first step. Build annotated bibliography, the kind of bibliography that I described before. Check the accuracy of references. You have to be sure that your reference is accurate, that anyone that is interested in reading it can access it. Try to check primary sources, and if you cannot, check secondary sources, but be careful in how you use them, okay? Of course, review updated sources, select relevant sources, because the consistency of your dissertation is related to how relevant the sources you are working with are to build your dissertation upon them. Okay, so if you are discussing a problem about water, for instance, and then you include sources about how rockets move through liquid components that do not include water. Oh, is that relevant for what I'm discussing? And this one is very, very important. Follow the rules of academic writing. I suggest that you check my webinars about academic writing, where I discuss the characteristics of academic writing, why it is in that way, and how can you master or improve your mastery of academic writing. Be critical. That's absolutely necessary. And be critical implies evaluate what you have read, why it is good, why it isn't, why it is useful for your work, why you have to discard it. Okay? Interpret rather than quote. Why? Because that's the only way that people, the readers, can be sure of that you really know what you are talking about. Remember that you are trying to convince people of something, and you cannot convince scholars, people from academic environments, just saying, it is in that way because I say so. No, you have to convince, and to convince, you have to show that you really know what you are talking about and that you have thought and reflect upon that, okay? And you need to develop a line of argumentation, okay? It means that you, from the first page of your dissertation to the last one, there must be clear what you think about and why you think about in that way, and that that everything is connected through that line. Is the golden thread, that you have a kind of thread that you use it in the first page, and then you move it through your dissertation to the last page without having problem going through the whole content, okay? You have to connect ideas in order to develop the line of argumentation. You have to be explicit. If you keep your ideas in your mind or you write it down very implicit, how can you be sure that your readers are going to interpret your ideas in the way that you intend them to do it? So the only way of being sure of that is making your ideas explicit, not thinking, oh, that's obvious. No, that's not obvious. Or that may not be obvious, okay? And discuss all the variables involved in the problem. When you select your problem, you analyze your problem, you have to know what all the variables that are involved, at least at the present state of art, and you have to discuss all those variables, because if you do not discuss one of them, perhaps that exclusion affect your findings, and what you have found perhaps may be explained by that or may be not being explained by that, okay? Okay, and the main idea of today is that literature review is essential to the study because it defines the framework within which the whole study is developed. It establishes the links to the relevant research network, and it provides the basis for your decisions and conclusion. If you approach the task of writing your literature review following a coherent, consistent, and effective approach, you will be able to build a solid foundation upon which a high-quality thesis or dissertation can be created. These are today's references, and this is what you can find at Dr. Net, and to help you improve and be more effective when doing your dissertation process. Look at the last one. Academic Writing gets a weekly boost on Fridays. And I suggest that if you are not a linguist, please pay attention to that, because that will help you a lot to write a better dissertation, especially better literature review. So now, my dear, if you have any question, if you have any comment, please feel free to write it down at the chat box. No questions? Was I so? Oh, there is one here. How do we access other webinars, particularly the one you referred earlier? You have to go to your university page, and there you will find them. There you will find the instruction how to do that, because there are some. There is the opportunity to ask for previous webinar to be again, to be published again, okay? Okay, but it says that it was great and very clear and helpful. Regina says theoretical framework. I guess that she wants me to talk about theoretical framework, right, Regina? Is that what you are saying? Okay. Let me say exactly what I talked about in the previous webinar. Oh, just wait a minute. Yeah. I'm checking my notes so I can give you, no? Ah, okay. Sorry. I thought that you want me to explain that again. What Regina is saying is that's a way of get the previous webinar. Well, the previous webinar name was Chapter 1, Lighthouse. Lighthouse because for me, Chapter 1 functions in a dissertation in the same way as a lighthouse functions in a storm. It guides you, and when you are on troubled waters, you look at it and say, oh, that's where I have to go to. Okay. Any other question? However, Regina said, however, I will take the PowerPoint if you have it. Yes, let me post it. Just a moment. I'm going to include the handouts. Wait a minute. Just a moment. Okay, I'm going to upload it to the handouts tab. There you have. Okay. Yes, it is. I think it's an analogy that for me is very illustrative, because any student that is developing a research study, especially a dissertation of physics, feels sometimes lost in troubled waters. What percentage of the dissertation should the literature review be? I mean, there is no any formula to define that. You need to write down as much as it is necessary to make clear the nature of the problem and the nature of all the variables involved and the relationship among them. So you cannot say 40 pages or 100 pages. No, you have to look at your problem, study its nature, define its variables, and begin to discuss each one of those variables in your literature review, and connect all that information, all that discussion in such a way that at the end of the literature review, you have a clear, comprehensive, valid, and accurate picture of what is going on with the problem. So no percentage, David. Any other question? Oh, let me stop the recording. I'm going to invite all of you to the next webinar, who is about how to do the things, okay? It's about the methodological chapter of your dissertation. So see you. Thank you for registering, and a special thanks for the people who come to this presentation. We can continue talking after this. Bye.